Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Rock Your Shine after you have been cracked wide open. Today, I have with me a very special guest that I'm excited to share with all of you his story. It's a remarkable story of resilience and healing. I have with me today Jeremiah Fulmer, and Jeremiah is a personal growth promoter, a transformational development educator, a coach, an eternal student, and presently he is doing intense study around becoming a grief and trauma recovery coach. I want to welcome you, Jeremiah, to the show today. And before we jump into your story, I just want to say a couple of more things to ground us in our conversation today. Jeremiah comes from a very long history of trauma, physical, sexual abuse. He is going to talk a little bit, actually a lot about that and where he is today, and really not only healing himself, but jumping into this world of working with others who have a deep history of trauma. As you guys know, I have been pulling cards to ground us in our conversation. And today I pulled a very poignant card with where Jeremiah is in his own life. And the card is mending. Let me quickly just read the oracle message around what that card means, because I know that there are listeners that they always need to, there are people out there that need to hear the message too. Each time we're hurt and allow that hurt to pass through us without understanding and integration, we accumulate an unwanted burden. This keeps us chained to the very thing we need to heal: the pain, the memories, the echoes of resentments, and the arguments that we rehearse over and over again. Now is the time for mending rifts, healing wounds, and letting go of the old hurts in order to reclaim your power. Now is the time to forgive, to release, to make peace, and to make amends to others, to set yourself free. So, Jeremiah, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Susan.
Hi. So, I have been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. We've had to reschedule numerous times because of our own schedules. So where would you like to start? I can think of so many different places to begin with this story, but I would like you to jumpstart us with what feels right for you today.
Well, I think I will start, I guess, at the beginning, only because recently a lot of this stuff has come back up. So I don't believe that it's what started me on the path towards wanting to be a coach and counsel and help other people heal. I think that started later, but just with this last weekend, being able to spend time with my biological mother and my grandmother and hearing some of the stories that I wasn't aware of on top of, what had happened to me in regards to trauma, grief, I guess, my initial grief, my initial trauma. I was 4 years old, and my mother was selling drugs, just kind of living that kind of lifestyle out of reaction to things that had happened to her in the past that I was made aware of. Again, like I said, just recently, that she was also abused and sexually abused, physically abused, which led to her acting out when she grew up as well. I was living with her. My father didn't have custody. I was with her alone. And her boyfriend at the time, or whoever she was with at the time, had molested me, and she found out about it, and she ended up shooting him, and he died. But the initial trauma that I remember, to the best of my ability, is the separation from her, like the police dragging her away, kicking and screaming, and all the things that come along with that. So I think that's where a lot of it started. I think the separation anxiety and whatever else that happened after that led to, so after that, my father did get custody.
Jeremiah,
And
before you leap ahead into that,
sure,
did you bear witness to your mother shooting her
I was
boyfriend?
in the I was in the house. I didn't see it happen. I heard it.
And then
Uh
did she get life?
no, no. And I actually, her and I haven't talked in extreme detail because like I was telling you before, we were kind of separated from each other's lives for a long time. We did come back together years ago and establish a relationship, but these are questions like I never really got a lot of the details about that kind of stuff. She wasn't in there for life. She has been home for quite some time. I think there was some form of overturnment that took place, that some sort of re-evaluation of her sentencing and stuff like that, which is, like I say, these are all details that I'm
And
hoping to get from her.
that's fine.
Oh,
I know that my listeners are going to be wondering though. But it was super traumatic that you were separated. So this horrific thing happened. Your mother's hauled, she's taken away by the cops. You're separated, and now you go live with your dad. Did you have a relationship with your father at 4 years old? Did you ever like stay with him before, did you guys have joint custody? I suppose is my question.
I don't recall spending a lot of time with him. No, at that point, I don't. Even going back through pictures, my father has passed. See, this, I'm fortunate to have the relationship I do with my grandmother and my mother. My mother is very ill right now, in the process of passing away from cancer. I'm going back up there tomorrow for the next few days just to kind of spend some more time with her and stuff. And this is something I just found out about last Wednesday. But there's not a lot of people left around for me to get any more details from, with my father being gone. My mother, I say my mother's my stepmother, who raised me, who has always just been my mother, even my sister. But anyway, so she didn't get life. She did end up coming home. I didn't see it happen. I did hear it happen. My grandmother and my aunt took me out of that home at that time. And this is amazing timing, because I was actually able to spend time with my grandmother and hear some of these stories. When my father tried to come pick me up from my aunt's house, they let the dogs out and were not going to let him have me. So he ended up having to come back with the police, which I don't have recollection of that as a memory, but it doesn't mean that I didn't have some kind of reaction to that as well as a child, you know? So at that point, my father got custody, and he was with my stepmother. They weren't married yet, but they were together. So it kind of moved me from, and listen to some of the stories, just the environment. It wasn't just my mom, it was my uncles, my aunts. There was just a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse. There was just a lot of abuse in that side of the family. A lot of trauma, a lot of drama, a lot of unhealthy relationships, which that stuff is generational. It just worked its way right down. And that's where I was as a small child. And I was fortunate enough to be removed from that. And my great grandfather at the time, and this is something I just found out recently also, my great grandfather at the time instructed my mother's side, my biological mother's side of the family, to leave me alone and to stop interacting with me. I'm in a better place, better environment, more stable setup. It was his instructions to them to let me continue my life and try to get me away from all of that. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
I was just going to say, are there any other children in the home at this point? Does your stepmom have children that she's bringing into the home? Is it just you, your
Nope.
dad, and your stepmom?
Yep. At that stage,
Okay.
yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. As far as having trauma responses and neurologically impacted effects from what happened, I remember in school having, I was hyperactive. I had to have Ritalin. I was always in the principal's office, in the counselor's office, in ISS, in school suspension. There was even for being in the loving, caring, stable environment that I was in, which in retrospect, I do see there also, some forms of like CPTSD with not neglect, but maybe a lower level of affirmation. There's things, and my father was amazing. I love my father. My mom was great, but there were things that I recall, statements that stick out in my head from memories as a child. What are you, boy, stupid? Are you fucking dumb? What's wrong with you? Just little things like that, which I don't think was meant to be malicious, but I do feel like that stuff does have an impact in the long run.
And those aren't little things, right? It's developing your sense of self, your identity, your self-esteem, right? Because if we're told we're stupid or we're not going to amount to anything, that becomes part of our belief system. I mean, when you think
Yes.
about the thoughts, our thoughts are always attached to our belief, and our beliefs come from somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and in regards to creating your identity through that stage, having already went through the separation of, being removed from my mother, like we build our identity based on the stability that we're surrounded with. So a lot of that was disrupted. So, growing up as a child through that, like, no, there was no, I mean, I got the belt as a disciplinarian thing up to a certain stage. And I feel like my mom put an end to that. And we talked about that too. Like, she was kind of the one that was like, I don't think the belt thing's necessary. And I feel like that's obviously came from my dad's side of the family. My big pa, who was an amazing man, pretty sturdy dude, but the disciplinarian, so that stuff came down. And I think with the trauma, and it's so widespread, and it's the revelations and stuff that have come to my mind about my family and everything through learning to be a trauma recovery coach and studying grief and all these things. It's so widespread. It blows my mind. My mom, and when I refer to my mom, I mean like my stepmom, the one who raised me. She'd grown up in a house with physical abuse and verbal abuse. And so I think her history with that is kind of what led her to being able to sever like my father from the whole belt thing. So overall, not a lot of abuse in that environment, past the whole belt thing. There wasn't smacking and all that stuff. And so it was stable to that degree, but I had behavioral problems. My younger sister was born when I was 8, Melissa. And yeah, like I say, our childhood was normal, quote unquote, for the most part, up to a certain point. And so high school starts with the drugs, and a little bit of violence, getting in trouble in school. And I always felt like I was being picked on, so I was retaliating. It was that kind of thing.
I want to pause though for a minute, because you keep
Sure.
saying that there was no abuse or anything like that, but it's sort of what you're studying trauma now. So you are very aware of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, I'm sure at this point, and what that
We
means.
just started that. I haven't gotten into that just yet, but that's part of my homework that was just assigned from class today. So
Yeah. So you'll even understand more. I mean, because to have the kind of trauma that you had at 4 years old, people do not quite understand how trauma the degree to which it impacts us as children. And so for listeners who are not aware of ACEs, it is an acronym for adverse childhood experiences, and you can look it up. And the research that has been done around that now is numerous. And so that is what happened to you at 4. So when you talk about, having PTSD or having to be on Ritalin or the ADHD or all of these other things, at 4 years old, going through that trauma, and I'm sure you probably never went to see a therapist for it, right? When you were 4 years old.
no.
And exactly. So I feel like it's important, to put that out there, to understand that absolutely impacted the trajectory of your life. And so, and because I know that you're about to tell us what that life looked like and some of the other horrific things that have happened to you before getting you to where you are now. So sorry for the interruption, but I want
interrupt anytime. I prefer it to be more of a conversation anyway. And bringing that up too, when I tell my story or I share certain things about all of the stuff that's happened to me, because it's happened to me and I've been through it and I've processed it and I've moved forward with it. To me, and this might come into play with why I'm kind of downplaying whatever abuse there was even after the fact, because it's normal. It's normal. But I've shared this story with people before, and their response is, it's like, how, like, that's a lot. And it is a lot, but because I've been through it, I feel like
we normalize it. We normalize our
yeah,
experiences because there's nothing to compare it to. You didn't grow up in a different household with a different life. You grew up in your household with your life. Right. So
right.
if we don't have anything to compare it to, it is normal from what we understand our life to be. Right.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So until somebody says, wow, I can't believe that happened, you're like, what? What happened? That didn't happen to everyone. Not everyone grew up in this household. Or in a
right.
household like this? Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I've grown to be a little more mindful too of how and this is one of the reasons why I appreciate you doing this podcast with me, because I want to be able to share this story, but I also want to do it in such a manner where I'm not just bombing on people. And I've done that. I realized it in retrospect. I didn't realize it at the time, where we kind of start talking and I share all these things. And for people who aren't, like I say, it's just like you're bombing all this stuff on them. And for some people, like, that's traumatic. And it wasn't something that I was really aware of. It's just kind of how I was going about it. So I'm trying to learn how to be more mindful of that as well as I move forward through this learning experience that I'm going through. So moving along, I suppose.
Hmm.
High school, not as much trouble as like elementary school, but I think I was just becoming a little more aware of consequences and actions and stuff like that. But I still had some problems. And then started with drinking and, smoking weed is just, that's where it starts for a lot of people, I think, led to a life. And
Are
I,
you
and I,
angry? Are you an angry kid? Or are you now you're just kind of like, because I'm still thinking about your mother who is in prison and the impact that that has on children. Are you asking about your mother? Like, do you know anything about your mother? Like, what is happening for you around that?
I feel like that I asked when I was younger. I don't recall. Like, I knew she was in prison. I knew she'd gotten in trouble. I remembered her being hauled off. I don't have a lot of memory of any explanation past that, or any validation of it either. I feel like a lot of it was, let's just pretend it didn't happen, which is, he's hyperactive, put him on Ritalin. Well, was I hyperactive or was I acting out because of what I'd experienced? So, and there was no diving deep into any of that at that stage. It was just like, let's just move on. Let's just move on.
Okay,
And
so
I mean,
you're in high school. Are you getting into trouble? I know you're smoking, you're doing some drinking. Are you
I mean, yeah. I mean, not, I don't know. So, and again, maybe this is what we were just talking about. I feel like it wasn't a lot of trouble, but yeah. So I was arrested at, um, 13 or 14 I got caught stealing a radar detector. We were stealing, I say we, friends of mine and I, stealing little things, radar detectors, car stereos, taking them to the pawn shop, doing stuff like that. So I did get arrested for that, was on probation. So that's where a lot of, and actually now that I did get caught stealing prior to that from a hardware store, like padlocks and slip chains for a dog. I don't know, just stupid stuff. Probably just looking for some kind of attention or whatever causes that kind of behavior. So yeah, so in trouble doing that kind of stuff, in trouble with the law at 13 or 14. Probation, no juvenile home or anything like that. Probation was for quite a while, grounded, obviously, a lot. And a couple of physical altercations in high school, nothing major, nothing really jumps out. But got along with everybody for the most part. Like, I wasn't angry. I wasn't like, I could kind of interact with almost anybody, like kind of had that survival chameleon mode. Again, didn't recognize that at the time, but in retrospect, I kind of see being able to kind of fit in anywhere. It was more of, I wasn't like in any one clique in high school, more of a stoner, I guess, but not one of the stoners. Didn't do sports, but I could talk with like the jocks. And I don't know, but still kind of had, problems here and there for sure.
hmm
But I got along great with all my teachers. My grades were absolutely terrible.
Oh, I
And it,
thought you were
and it
gonna
was,
say, hey, I thought you were gonna say my grades were great.
no,
Just
I'm sorry. I actually graduated second to last in my class in school because I don't recall liking school much at all. Like, I like the socializing part. And I remember, oh, he's smart. He just doesn't apply himself. And I feel like that's a generic stamp that they put on kids who just don't want to do the school thing very well. So I did just enough, like, through, being in trouble with my parents and being grounded and being, just kind of barraged at to get this stuff done. I did just what I needed to do.
I think it's incredible that you graduated, honestly, given all of the things. Because I know, yeah, I mean, I think that that's amazing. And at the point of graduation, did you have a vocation? Like, what was your plan after you graduated? Like,
I
where?
I partially attempted the Air Force with a friend of mine from school. took, and forgive me, it is so long ago, took some kind of placement test or some sort of test for the Air Force and was accepted. But because I had a childhood felony, they requested that I get like 3 letters of reference or 3 letters of recommendation or something like that. And at that stage, I was just like, whatever, I'm just
It,
going to live.
it, it
So
was way too much to pull together,
it
right?
was
You're
too much.
like,
Yeah. In my
yeah.
mind, in my mind, that's too much work. And that must just mean that that's not the direction I'm supposed to go or whatever. So yeah, no real plan, just graduated and worked. And again, we just kind of worked and partied. And that
What were
was
you, where
really,
were you working? What were you doing?
I started in a nursing home in the dietary department. So, uh, washing dishes, putting together food trays,
And this
cleaning
was
dining.
this post graduation? Was this after you finished
That
high
was no,
school?
that was during high school. That was like one of my first real jobs. After high school, I got a job working for a vending machine company.
And were you still living with your parents at this point?
No, I had moved out actually. I was 17. It was right after I graduated. I ended up moving
Wow.
out and moving in with a girlfriend and her family. And yeah, I was filling vending machines. It was a good job, paid really well, but I was just smoking and partying and started with amphetamines and stuff around then. So wasn't doing right. Ended up losing that job and then did factory work, which was a little more conducive to that second shift. So it was a little more conducive to that party lifestyle, you know. And then through that, just the drinking and the partying, and ended up breaking up with the girl whose family I was staying with and moved to a different town, which was closer to where I was able to find a job, and just living with some guys that, that's all we did. And then we'd lift weights and go fight. And it turned into kind of like a violent kind of atmosphere, which led to going to prison. And I justified my actions through this. So my sister at the time was 15, and she came to visit because I was over an hour away from my hometown at that point. She came to visit, and I'm smoking weed with her and letting her drink and just kind of being a terrible influence. And then, so one of my roommates, and he wasn't originally a roommate, but we gave him a place to stay because, when you're in that environment, it's just like people flopping, and it's really inconsistent. And so one of the guys we let stay with us, I ended up having a problem with, personality wise and money wise and all this other stuff. And so she came to me, and we were tripping acid, smoking weed, popping
So your
pills.
sister came to you. When you said she, do you mean your sister?
Yeah,
You're
I'm
15.
sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of
That's okay. I'm with you. I'm following.
hopping back and forth. So she had come to visit, and I was living in a town called Three Rivers, and we were partying all the time, and it was like hard partying. Still maintaining a job at that point, but barely. Yeah, doing acid, smoking weed, popping pills, liquid Valium, drinking whatever we could get our hands on. And it wasn't just me; it was a group of
It was
friends.
your group. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we had tribed up. Not the most beautiful thing, but. And she had come to me and told me that this individual had molested her. Now put his hand in her pants, and just his hand, but still. And before this, I know something had happened to my sister. And again, this is something that I've learned in retrospect. She was a cutter, and the denial in my family around all that. This was way before this happened. I feel that it's relevant though. She was a cutter, and it was just kind of like, oh, it's a teenager thing. And there was just so much denial and lack of education and lack of understanding, and lack of really knowing what that meant. It just kind of got downplayed.
And let me just do a quick little pause here for
Yep,
listeners who
go
may
ahead.
not understand what cutting is. So it's self-injurious behavior that we often see in adolescents who are in deep emotional pain, and so they harm themselves. Some kids burn, they use a sharp object to cut themselves. There are different ways that young people engage in self-injurious behaviors to release what is very deep emotional pain. So go ahead, Jeremiah.
Yeah, it's a trauma response. And she, through talking to her, years later, she had been raped at a party at a very young age, party she wasn't supposed to be at. but anyway, and it was her trauma response to that. And the cutting a lot of times is because they disassociate and they flatten themselves emotionally. It's like they don't feel anything. So the
Exactly.
pain and it kind of gives them.
It's a
Uh,
release. Hmm.
and again, not anything that I was aware of at the time, but she had come to me, and the headspace that I was in this environment before I went to prison was very violent. I was angry. So, and I feel like it may have been some sort of manifestation from before, but the lifestyle that I was living was we were lifting weights, we were going parties, we were starting fights, we were getting in fights.
And you were doing drugs, right? I
Oh
mean, the
yeah. Oh
drugs.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of factory work, a lot of amphetamines. Really liked being amped up, but it's just such a intense testosterone kind of, and it just led to a lot of violence, a lot of fights. And so anyway, had kind of established in my mind that it was all so much ego, just like not to be messed with. And my little sister came to me and told me that this guy had done this to her. So I went looking for him with a couple of friends of mine, and unfortunately found him and hurt him very, very badly, to the degree of where I was sentenced to 7 to 21 years for assault with intent to murder.
And he
He
did
he's
he did
he
survive.
survived. Yeah, he survived. I mean, there's no way to say that it was okay. Maybe a little bit because of what he did. I don't know. I feel like there's gray area there, but he did survive. He had to have reconstructive surgery. I can't imagine, what it was like for him to go through all of that. But that led to prison. Like I say, 7 to 21 years. I did 6.5 years.
Did the men that you were with who also helped
The
you beat this man, did they go to prison too, or was this just
one
you?
one of my friends did not, as all he did was drive the car, and I gave testimony on myself because it they were making it sound like all three of us did this. And the guy who drove, like, I didn't want him to he didn't do anything, and that's kind of like what they were leveraging. So instead of trying to fight everything and do this and that, I gave my own statement. The other guy did help me chase, and he did land blows. I had a weapon at that point. It was a flashlight, but it was still a blunt object. So that's what ended up doing the majority of the damage. So two of us did go to prison with the same sentence. The other one he was let out of the county jail. I believe he had probably probation and stuff like that. But
I want to I have to go back because something you said, I can't let it sit, but you
no,
talked about
no.
it, you talked about there being a gray area. And I want to pause here because I feel like I understand what you're saying, that your sister, like, you know what? I'm not going to put words into your mouth. What do you mean by there's a gray area?
So to do what I did, I
Hmm.
feel like that was over the top.
Hmm.
I do think that there was a part of me. Now, again, I was not sober in any way, shape, or form, which isn't justification, but it does kind of paint part of the picture.
It's not
Uh,
justification, but it's critical that we understand that when we are drinking, doing drugs, doing any of those things, I always say, oh, we're out of our mind, because we are not fully cognizant, and therefore we do things under the influence that most likely we would not do. This I'm talking about rape, when young boys get into a pack and they rape kids on, whatever, what I'm talking about.
yeah,
It is absolutely not an excuse, but it is a warning for people to understand that when they are under the influence, they will do things, or maybe
you're going to,
capable of things, that they would not do if they were in their right mind and sober.
yeah, you're not gonna filter your thought process. There's not going to be a justice versus, it's just, yeah, you're not going to filter it. You're just going to do. And that's exactly what happened. And by gray area, like I say, I do feel bad for what happened to him, but I justified in that what he did to my sister. And again, he wasn't sober either, but still, what he did to my sister, especially her still being a kid, not that that really matters. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't happen, period. And I was justified in what I did because of what he did.
You were justified in your anger.
Yes.
Being the
Yes,
vigilante, though, it's not justified in you taking it into your own hands to punish him. And I feel
correct.
like that's the important piece, because what happened to your sister was wrong. That's why we have a court of law. So I just wanted to make that
That's
clear.
what I meant. No, that's
Yes,
what I meant by
yes,
greater. Like I felt terrible, but what he did wasn't right either. But you're right.
yes.
There's a process, and that wasn't it. And I'm fortunate and grateful that he survived.
Thank God, right? Because
You
you could have
know,
been looking at life. So you're in prison. Talk to me and our listeners about what happened to you in prison. Was that an awakening for you, or it was after your release that you started to really wake up to who you are?
prison was the catalyst, and by that I don't mean the Michigan Department of Corrections, because the system that they've created is
It's
it's a
not
warehousing
empowering. Yeah.
it's a warehousing system. That's all it is. There aren't things put into place to a slight degree, maybe, but there aren't things put into place to help people who have been incarcerated understand themselves, understand, where their actions and decisions came from, what belief systems they're working out. Like there's nothing in place, throughout the whole system that helps people get better. To kind of simplify what I'm trying to say. It's it's a housing system. You do your time, you stay out of trouble, you go back out, good luck, figure it out. Now there's AA, there's NA, there are some programs that you have access to that are beneficial. And the main catalyst for me was a program that was offered. It wasn't through the Michigan Department of Corrections. It was an external contractor. His name was Pat Lynch, and I've been trying to figure out where he went. And this was 20 years ago or more, trying to figure out where he went. I don't remember the name of his company. I don't remember. I just remember that he had a cognitive behavioral therapy program that he had created for assaultive offender therapy. It was assault offender therapy, and it was based on cognitive behavioral therapy. And he taught about neurolinguistic programming. And even before that happened, I was reading like self-help books, personal development. Like I knew that the life that I was living and the way I was behaving, like that wasn't really me. I mean, I knew I could do better. And I was trying to figure out, like, okay, I need to figure out how my brain works and why I was doing these things. Like that was a quest I had before, but getting exposed to his class and especially the principles behind cognitive behavioral therapy and taking accountability, not just accountability for my actions, but accountability for the fact that if I want my mind to be better and different, if I want my life to be better and different, it's 100% my responsibility.
100%.
Yeah,
And
nope.
that bears repeating. The only thing actually that we have control over is our thoughts and the way that we respond to things that happen to us,
Yes.
and our actual emotions, right? I mean, everything in this lifetime is pretty much out of our control. I mean,
Yeah.
that saying, we make plans and God laughs, because I do this podcast, and I do this podcast because my brother died suddenly. So we know that I mean, the spiritual gurus out there talk about the only thing we have is right now. And it's true. The only thing that we have is the moment that we are actually living in. And as you know, 1 second you're free, and the next minute you are sentenced to 6 years in prison. And it took what?
Yeah.
How long to beat that man up? 10 minutes, 50 minutes? Who knows? But
Not
your
even.
your whole life changed in just that
Yeah.
flash.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
think I love what you're talking about right now, because it is at the heart of how we create our lives. Every single day, we can create a different life for ourselves. It's a choice.
Yes. We need to help people become aware of that. I feel like transformational development, personal development, CBT, other sciences like that should be taught at a high school level.
100%.
Not vocationally, like human being to human being, like to help you understand that your beliefs don't even really come from yourself. They've been passed down.
Absolutely.
It's all programmed. It's your environment. And this is why trauma and abuse and molestation and all these things
It's ancestral.
are
It's generation after generation after
yes,
generation. And you and I
yes,
talked about this. There is always an opportunity for somebody in that ancestral lineage to break the cycle of pain, abuse, and trauma. You are that person in
Yeah.
your family.
Yeah. Consciously intentional about how I interact with the children that I've been responsible for raising. Consciously intentional.
So you're in prison, you're getting this
Yeah.
education. What happens to you in prison? Do you start getting this education a year in? Is it 5 years in? What
That
is happening while you're in jail?
the first, so you're still in your own stage of whatever development you were in when you went in, like that's where you're at. So the first quite a few years actually is still lifting weights. I, I was smart enough to stay away from gambling. I didn't click up. I just kind of went with the flow, stayed out of trouble, minded my own business. You know, lifted weights was like primarily my only sport, and just kind of like minding my own business. And that keeps you out of trouble. When you start with the gambling, or you start, the only hustling I did some hustling to make money, but I was like ironing clothes. I was working the laundry, I was doing extra stuff, and like working outside from what the detail was, and like charging stamps and soap. Like that was the degree of it. I didn't try to run stores. I didn't want any more trouble than what I'd already had that got me to where I was. So it was pretty easy to kind of lay low, but nothing changed in my mindset, maybe a little bit. 'Cause like I say, I was doing some reading. I read, I read the Bible. I read about other religions. I read about Satanism. I wanted to understand as much as I could. Native American spirituality, Buddhism. I read a lot, which,
And were you getting any support on the outside? Was your father supporting you? Was your stepmom supporting you? Like, were you, because
yeah,
you
I
you
had,
landed there because you felt like you were protecting your younger sister, right? I mean,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. There was support, there was contact, there was visits, not financially, but there was restitution that was placed on me. So anything that was sent to me was, excuse me, anything that was sent to me was garnished and stuff like that. So not on that aspect, but yeah, I called home regularly. There was support. There was, like, I did have, my family was still there behind me through all of that to the best of their ability. Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
what was going on with the way that you felt about yourself? I mean, here you are, this young person who lands in jail, and you're lifting weights, you're trying to stay out of trouble, which is in and of itself remarkable that you can do that in prison. I did a lot of volunteer work in prisons and juvenile justice facilities, and that seems, I mean, I feel like everyone's always in lockdown. That's what it felt like when someone would do something and then everyone's in lockdown. And so what was happening for you in your head? What's going on in your thoughts? Are you thinking, like, are you scared? I mean, I'm just trying to get inside your head, where here you are doing real time in a prison, and you haven't changed your thought process at this point. What is going on for you? What are you thinking?
Scared, yes. Grief for the loss of my freedom. And at that stage, not aware that's what that was. But the depression that hits after that is 100% grief driven from the loss of your, not just your freedom to like move about the world, but like your freedom as a human being. Like everything is dictated to you. And in quarantine, so in Michigan, and I don't know if they still do it, but then you go to Jackson, which is a major prison, and you're what they call in the walls, where it's just a series of, I think it's like 5 stories. I can't remember how many cells, but you're just in this one single man cell all day, every day. They let you out to eat, they let you out for a shower, and they let you out 1 hour a day for rec, but that doesn't happen every day. So
So
you're
you're
just,
in
yeah,
lockdown for 23 hours a day, basically.
yeah, basically. And when you eat, it is, they break the doors, you step out, you follow in a line, you walk through and get your tray. You kind of fill all the tables as you go, as you sit down and eat, and you have enough time to eat until the line continues to come on. So you don't just sit there and enjoy your meal. Like you eat until the conveyor belt of prisoners keeps coming, and then you get up and get out of the way, and whatever you haven't eaten is whatever. And then you go back to your cell. Showers is the same thing. Break the door, you walk down, you get in line at one spout. Like they're like the gymnasium style showers at this point. It's like a post with multiple outlets or multiple shower heads, like 4, I think. So you get in line at a spout, you walk up, you get wet, you go back to the end of the line, you soap up while you're waiting in line to get up, you get back under, you rinse off, you're done, you go directly back to your cell. Like that's quarantine in Jackson.
And are you at this point where you're like, how did I end up here?
Yes. Yes. How did I get here? I'm smarter than this. And what can I do to, like, this can't be a thing. This is not going to be a thing. I have to do my time. I'm here. Like, I understand all that. And to sit there having been sentenced to a 7 to 21 at the beginning, especially looking at what 7 years looks like, that's a holy shit moment.
And I don't really get that because 7 to 21, that's a big difference. Is that all about who you are in prison and the way that you behave, if that dictates from that 7 to 21 years how long you're going to be there?
It's minimum to maximum. So it's a minimum of 7 years with a maximum of 21 years. When I was originally sentenced,
depending on your behavior on the inside, right? That's what that means.
Yes. Yep. When they originally tried to charge me with attempted murder, which would have been even worse. So because I made a plea agreement and I told them what happened. I told them what I did to keep the driver out of trouble because they were trying to give him the exact same thing, which I didn't think was fair. So I pleaded it down to that assault with intent to murder, which is like this much of a step down, but it carried less time. So yeah, the 7 to 21, that's minimum to maximum. So if you get in there and you continue to get in trouble, then they can they can keep you all the way up to 21 years more if you catch another case while you're inside, which like I said, this was not going to be a thing. I knew that right down to my core. Like, okay, this is not what I want for my life for sure, which I think is what motivated a lot of my behavior in regards to being able to just kind of not get involved with the shit that causes problems. I did get in trouble at one stage. I'll tell you that story here in just a second. So that's where my head is scared to death, quite honestly scared to death because you hear all the stories and you see all the movies and in some of the higher levels, I believe it's like that. I went to a level 4, but I left quarantine and went to a level 4, but I was only there briefly. I was reclassified, and I think it was based on my psychological evaluation. And I went back to a level 2. So there's max 5, 4. I think at that point, like the 3s were kind of getting phased out. 2, and then camp, which camp was like low minimum security, stuff like that. So
like true camp at prison. Right?
Yeah.
You had more privileges, things like that.
Yeah, it's misleading terminology to some degree, but yeah.
I know. That's why I'm laughing. I don't think it's funny. It's just my sense of humor. Like camp, I think is hilarious.
Yeah. So started in level 4, was reclassified, and went to level 2. So it was, I feel like the environment that I was in made it a little bit easier to just kind of stay out of trouble. So that's where my head is at that point. And again, the things that I'm reading and the stuff that I'm looking into is I'm trying to figure myself out. I know the information's out there. And then at one stage we were transferred to Virginia. This is the only real trouble I got into. We were transferred to Virginia. So I'm in Michigan Department of Corrections. They have an overcrowding problem, and they contracted space through the Virginia Department of Corrections, and they transferred a bunch of us down there. And I did a year in Virginia. And Virginia does things a lot differently from Michigan. So Michigan in a level 2, you can go out to the yard, you can go out to a weight pit detail, you can go out and walk the track. There's certain times you can do that. You can go to the library at certain times. There's signups and they track all that stuff, but there's freedom to move about at certain times. There's times where you have to be in your cell or in your cube. But when we went to Virginia, that is not how they do things. In Virginia, it was 2-man cells in a pod, and you're in your cell, and that is where you are. And you go outside for an hour, and then you're in your cell.
I just have to ask you this, though, because I know about this transferring of inmates due to overcrowding. How do they pick and choose who they transfer?
Okay, so I might have still been smoking weed when I was in prison because it is available, and I volunteered. So
why would you do that? Why would you volunteer?
I think I was stoned, and I think my
No,
justification.
Jeremiah, you are killing me right now. Oh my God, I just love you.
I'm pretty sure that I was stoned, and it wasn't just me. It was one of my other cube mates, and the rationality behind
Did
it
you get
was,
anything for volunteering, like getting off the plane
I
if it's
don't,
overcrowded? Like,
I don't know if there was a benefit to that or not, but that was the justification, was like, hey, if we volunteer to do this, won't this look good?
yeah.
Like, so you have requirements when you go to prison. They either require that you take substance abuse, or they require that you go to AA, or one of my requirements was I had to have a job detail. Like, I always had some form of job while I was inside, which is good, gives you something to do anyway. But you do all those things and more because you try to pad your file, because when you go in front of the parole board, you want them, I want to go home. Like,
You
I
want to
did everything.
impress them and saying, I'm doing all the things that I need to do
Yep.
in order for
Yep.
me to get out of here early. Yeah.
Yep. So I think I think the guy I was hanging out with at the time and I thought it was a good idea, and maybe it would make us look good if we had volunteered for this thing. So, and then, you get the munchies and you eat some ramen noodles and you come down and you think, hey man, maybe we shouldn't have signed that. But by then, but by then it doesn't matter, So,
Oh,
so that's how we ended up down there. And because of the nature of how they ran things, we had plotted at one of our little, because the dining hall was in a different building, and we kind of plotted like, okay, when we get back, we're not going to lock down. We're going to stay in the pod. We're going to make them send the rum up here. The regional unit manager, we're going to make them send him up here so that we can discuss the terms of our imprisonment, because this isn't how we're supposed to be jailing, which was a terrible idea. I was one of the last ones in the pod. So when we stopped and turned around, I was closest to the door. And there was like a control center, and we're telling the correction officer, the CO, like, hey, no, we're not locking down. You need to get the rum up here. We're gonna get these rules and regulations lightened up, because we're not level 5 prisoners, which they didn't care at all.
they're really not in. They're
Yeah,
not into self-advocacy in prison.
they really don't care. So when the rum came through the door, he came through the door with what we call a goon squad, which was, it looks like an NFL football team. Like, these guys are all they're just monsters, and rubber gloves, and they had broke the doors, and I'm standing with my back to the majority of everybody. So when these guys came through the door, it ended up there was 3 of us that stayed in the pod. Everybody else locked back up. So now we look like we're organizing some sort of coup. So I ended up, this is the trouble I got into. I ended up going to the hole, and I was in there for over 90 days. I can't remember if it was 93 or 92 or something like that.
You were in solitary
Yeah,
confinement
they
for
call it
3
solitary.
months.
Yeah, it was over 90 days. It was 90. It was like the maximum amount of days that they could keep me in there. And I'd been to a hearing, and they kept me in there. But it was, the charge that they gave me was participating in or encouraging others to participate in an unlawful group demonstration. And I have that memorized because it's kind of fun to say, but it's also like it doesn't look good on paper.
Oh my God.
So yeah, down in Virginia, and the hole in Virginia it's a block of single man cells. So like, you can talk to other people, like you can hear the guy next to you and the guy across from you and stuff like that. But there was no yard. They'd bring you out, take you down to the shower every once in a while, bring you back. You could look outside if you stood on the bunk, and like there was a small window at the top that had like one bar across. So if you stood on the bunk and grabbed the bar and did a pull up, you could hold yourself, and you could kind of see out to the yard. So you could see outside for as long as you could hold yourself up.
What happened to
So
you in this 90 days of being in the hole? What was?
I don't, I'm not really sure. Whatever I had to do mentally to get to the other side of that is what I did. I did read a lot. Like they did have a library cart. So a lot of,
So you
wasn't
got
like
to
you could
read. Well, you got to read it while you were. Thank God.
yeah. And it was a lot of fiction, whatever little stories I could get my head into. Push-ups, sit-ups, did some kind of working out on a regular basis just to kind of keep some sort of schedule. And then went for a hearing and thought they were going to let me back to general population. And for, whatever reason, I don't know if they were trying to prove a point or if it was just their policy. Like, there's no real way to know. But yeah, ended up flopped back into there. And then it was over 90 days. before I got back to general population. So what happened?
How far into jail are you, a prisoner are you at this time when are you 4 years in? How
this is
long?
this is my my third and fourth year in. So it was like my third going into my fourth year was when I was in Virginia.
And it's even more surprising to me to have that kind of altercation get thrown into solitary or lockdown or the hole or whatever. Are those all the same, by the way? Like when you say the hole or
The
solitary,
whole
it's the same
solitary
thing, right?
confinement. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you're so, and yet you still get out early. How? Why? What happened? How were you able to cut your sentence short?
The program that I spoke about,
When
the
is
assault
that? Is
offenders,
that after this 90
that's
days that you've
yeah,
spent?
that's after, excuse me, that's after that. And I'm back in Michigan, and
Okay.
I've worked my, I've done the AA and the NA. I've done the things they've asked me to do. I've kept my job detail. I've got good rapport with the COs. I've got good rapport. I've been like, I forget the term now. I was a block representative multiple times, where kind of was like a liaison between, the inmates in our block and the COs and stuff, and had worked my way down to a camp security level. And I think primarily just staying out of trouble and doing what they asked me to do, and really wanting to just go home. I don't want no smoke. I don't feel like I need to prove myself to anybody. I just want to go home. And then the assault offenders therapy program, I took that twice. Actually, I got so much out of the whole concept of cognition and cognitive behavioral therapy, and understanding that we are responsible and taking responsibility for learning and growing and nurturing a mindset that's going to keep me home. I took that class twice because I got so much out of it.
And
And at that
is this your real awakening? Is this when this starts to happen, when the lights start flashing and you're like, oh my God?
Yeah, it's when I started realizing that it's gonna be okay. Like I was right. Like that, all that shit, all that terrible behavior and all that. Like I came to realize that, okay, that's not me. I do possess the capacity to be a great person, and this is how I can learn how to do it and take control of it and
And
be mindful.
how did this class impact your behavior inside? Like what was going on? Did you start to mentor other, like, I'm just curious because I know
This
here you are now, what you're learning and teaching and what you're doing in the world is so remarkable. So
that's
how
a
did that,
great that's a great question and a good point, because at that stage we had AA and NA, and we actually brought in Emotions Anonymous, which is, it's the same 12 step program, but it's primarily based around mastering and understanding your emotions and how to deal with anger and how to deal with shame and how to deal with, all of the things. Like, I lobbied and got that program brought into the camp that I was at, and which kind of, again, that kind of stuff establishes like your character
yes.
in the eyes of the people who are going to be talking to the parole board when the time comes. And I didn't do it primarily to pad my file. I did it because I understood the benefit of it, but I also understood that it was going to look good. Like, so
But your intention, I mean, I think that almost is a secondary benefit because you're changing now, right? Like you are fundamentally changing. You are, the first step in changing is raising our awareness that there is actually some other way to live. That
yes,
right. So you're changing internally, and externally, you are showing those changes by advocating for this. And it's great that it's going to pad your resume or whatever it's called inside, but that it's going to look great for you. But you're doing this now from a very different motivation, right? Because this now is about you changing your worldview, changing the way you think about yourself, and the benefit that this can have on other inmates who are also in deep suffering, right? Because you're all in deep suffering.
yes, yes. And it's not just me. The camp
Right.
that I was at, the camp that I came home from, and I didn't come straight home. I went to a center, a halfway house, but the camp that I was released from was like the whole environment. Like, first of all, it's all short timers. Everybody wants to go home, but there was an environment there of growth, of healing, of trying to get a grip. And it wasn't just me. The people that I hung around with on a daily basis were dedicated to growing and building and becoming better. And so, like I say, it wasn't just me. The environment supported it also. And a lot of the other guys that were my friends that were inmates as well. Like we had a good environment to achieve this in, which helped out tremendously.
That's really beautiful.
So,
yeah. You had the support, you had staff that sounds like they were supportive of this.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful, because we need each other, don't we? We really need each other. We need mentors. We need compassion, right? Because you also had COs, correctional officers on the inside too, that can actually create more trauma for inmates, right? That abuse of power, all of those things that happen inside prison, and not just inside, but happens in corporations all the time, right? Where people abuse their power. So, but for the purpose of this conversation, you had actual staff people that were also supportive. Is that true?
Yeah, this facility there, and a lot of the correction officers were more, like you say, the higher levels. That's where you get the abuse of power, the ego driven, just all the negative interactions between the COs, and the mindset is different. The energy is different, because people are looking at life. People are looking at 10, 15, 30 years. So the mindset is different. And in the environment that we were in, like, they had work crews that left prison. Like, they went out on a daily basis to go clean state parks, and the staff that were involved with that, the COs and everybody that was involved there, just the whole, like I say, the whole environment was more conducive and more supportive of, go out and get it right this time. It wasn't so negative. It wasn't so dark.
The second chances, and you're motivated,
and I don't know
because you guys want to get the hell out of prison, right? So you have a motivation also to make progress, to make this transition back into society.
Yep, exactly. And I don't know how prevalent that is within the MDOC or any prison system for that matter. I feel like there's got to be both. I know there's abuse of power. I know there's people out there, COs, that hate inmates and vice versa and so on and so forth. But I also know that there's light out there also.
Absolutely.
Trying to do its thing. So I was fortunate enough to be in that kind of a situation.
Thank you for tuning in to Rock Your Shine after you've been cracked wide open. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock Your Shine, please subscribe, share it with others, and leave a rating and review. Be sure to check out the show notes for resources related to this episode. And take a moment and follow me on Instagram at Susan.Casey, where I share a tip of the day to help you feed your soul and cultivate your inner shine. And most importantly, if you have a transformational story to share, please email me at rockyourshine@gmail.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys here next week.